Hello, you are listening to A Woman's Guide, episode 24. Are you always stressed out, anxious, worried? What is delayed onset PTSD? And is there a possibility that this has something to do with your stress levels? Today's episode is dealing with stress, delayed onset PTSD, and adrenaline fatigue, part 1. Stay tuned. This is a woman's guide to reclaiming wholeness after sexual abuse. For all of you listening, welcome to the show. I am Simone, your confidant and guide. Thank you for tuning in. Okay, so if you have been listening to this show from the very beginning, from episode 1 or episode 2 or whatever, perhaps you are saying to yourself, well, I guess it's about time you made an episode about stress. Because stress is a very important topic, and it's something that we can all relate to. And I know, and I knew from the very beginning, I said, okay, I have to talk about stress. But what I noticed is that with stress, the stress really runs very deep, and especially regarding the things that we've gone through, the things we've endured, stress plays a huge role in our life, and it affects how we deal with our relationships and how we just endure and how we think of ourselves in our lives. So anyway, definitely I think those particularly, and especially for those who particularly are survivors of sexual abuse, we need to know how to effectively and healthily deal with stress, manage stress, okay? And obviously, the ultimate goal is to absolutely rid ourselves of stress, but of course, I mean, that is really a difficult task to completely obliterate stress in our lives, okay? So really, we're just trying to healthily deal with stress and manage stress, okay? And I say this through my research and my studies and, of course, my own experiences. And this is what I've come to realize and understand, that having gone through trauma, especially, well, just trauma in general, having gone through trauma on that level, with that type of distress, it causes us to have more of a sensitivity to stress. There's a real term called stress sensitization, because we've gone through such distressing circumstances or situations or events, and we develop a extra sensitivity, hypersensitivity to stress. We respond, we overreact, or we have more of a response to stress. We have more of an awareness or a feeling of stress in any kind of circumstance or situation. So I'm just saying that we have more of a stress sensitivity because of trauma. And of course, we're all different. I mean, we all have different thresholds of how we can deal with stress, or how we can handle stress, or different things that create more stress within us. So it really does depend on each individual. But I think, and based on my research and studies and the things that I've seen and the things I've gone through, is that trauma really does create more of a propensity within yourself to become more stressed out and to not be able to, effectively deal with stress, manage stress. It really just makes you gives you more of a propensity to become stressed out. Okay, so that is the main reason why I made this episode. Okay, so let's get into what stress means by definition. And this is in context within the self, within our minds and with our bodies. Okay? Stress is the state of an emotional and mental tension and or strain as a result of some kind of difficulty or experience or challenging circumstance. Okay, that's how it's defining it. There's other definitions that do mean the same thing, but it's speaking more of it in terms of whether you, for example, are stressing a term or you're stressing a idea, which just means that you're trying to emphasize something. That can mean, stress can mean that in that way. Or if you are literally applying physical pressure to something or tension or strain physically. So you're physically applying pressure or tension to something or someone. That can also be stress in another way. But that's more of a physical definition. But I'm speaking about within the mental and emotional state or the mental and emotional realm where we can experience stress. And I believe that if you watched my video about emotional slumps, emotional fatigue and exhaustion, and I spoke about the reason why we experience those type of things, those reasons why we get ourselves to the point where we're physically, emotionally exhausted, fatigued, and why we experience some kind of emotional slump is because there's too much of ourself going out and not enough coming in. Now with stress, and this really does feel like it's the right thing right way to look at it. With stress, there's too much going in and not enough coming out. So it's kind of the opposite, right? And I say this because when you are stressed, you are stressed because there is too much going inside of you. There's too much going in, there's too much being directed inwardly, and there's not enough being released and going out. And for example, when we're stressed, we're always thinking about what we have to do, where we need to go, what we need to accomplish. Oh, so-and-so needs my help, and this person needs my help, and oh, I have to move over here, and oh, I have this financial difficulty over here, and I have so much burden and responsibility and tasks, and I have a lot to do, and I have not enough time, and I have less resources, and you notice what I'm saying? It's like it's all going on inside of you. There's too much being directed to you, okay? And this is just the way you're thinking and the way you're feeling, and all the energy is going inside of you. It's getting directed to you, and it's becoming stuck and blocked in, and not enough is going out. That means we're extending too much energy toward ourselves or directing it at ourselves without properly balancing it out by extending it back outward. So that's just the way I see it. That's the way I see stress. Because when you're stressed, most often than not, you're burdened. You're burdened by something. You're burdened by, and of course, it all is directed at your emotional state, and it's directed, or the stress comes from your emotional and mental state. So it's really about how you, it's the way that you react to something. It's not necessarily the external happening, but it's our response or reaction to something. But what I'm saying about stress is that even though it's not really what's happening, it's what's going on inside of us, it's just the fact that we are directing things inwardly, mentally and emotionally at ourselves. We're directing energy and we're directing emotions and thoughts at ourselves, and we're not directing enough outwardly. And that's what creates the stress. It's just taking all of this in, absorbing all of this in, taking the burden on, perhaps feeling unsafe or feeling anxious and worried about what's going to happen and what I need to do and how I need to do it and where I need to do it and who's going to help me, and I don't know if I have enough time, and I don't know if I have enough resource, and so many people are pulling at me. That's stress. That's stress. That is stress. So it's too much going in and not enough coming out. That's what I believe. Okay, so once again, I'm saying in this context is that stress is something that is created within us. So it's not necessarily what's going on the outside. It's how we're reacting and how we're responding and how we think about what we're going through. Okay, so it's not necessarily the outside. It's what's consciously going on inside of us. And we don't realize that we're doing it. It's the process of us doing or creating this stress within us because it's such an ingrained habit, and we've learned and we've been programmed and we've seen, and the way that our life is designed, and just the way we grew up and how we think, and humanistically how we behave to certain things, how we've been taught to behave in certain things. It's just, you know what I'm saying? It's just how we grew up. It's how we learned to become stressed. Okay, but I mean, at the end of the day, too, it's really just how you look at it. It's really how you look at stress and what you're really trying to say about it. But you know, you do have certain circumstances where it is just like, for most anyone, it can create stress for you because of the things that you're undergoing, the things you are dealing with, the things that you are enduring, or the obstacles you're trying to work through, or the problems you're trying to solve. For most people, they would experience stress. Now, if you had someone else who grew up in another way, or they were raised another way, or they understood that they did not have to feel a certain thing because of a certain experience, or that they can choose their thoughts, or something across that line, okay? When they understand this, they're able to not necessarily feel the stress that you're feeling. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's really a matter of how you react and respond and how you think about it that creates the stress. So, and that's the reason why that's just really the reason why different people handle stress differently. Because some people cannot handle some things, okay? They would not be able to handle certain things because of how they think, how they grew up, how they're programmed, how they're genetically predisposed to deal with stress or deal with unknown things. And then there are other people that can handle it a lot better. Like, for example, if someone were to live your life, some of those people would not be able to handle it. They'd be so stressed out. They probably would not be able to deal with the things that you deal with in the way that you deal with it. They'd probably really burn out, and they're really stressed out. Or they could not deal with it to the extent of which you've been able to deal with it. So I mean, it's really just, it depends. Because I know there's certain things that I've looked at other people's lives and I said, I don't think I'd ever be able to handle that. And I probably couldn't. Or at least I'm not equipped to I'm not equipped to handling that because I'm not at that stage of development or maturity or spiritual awareness, or because I have certain reactionary patterns, and you know what I'm saying? Possibly the things that I've gone through it would cause me to just totally burn out, or I just would not be able to handle it. And because maybe they just have the strength. Some people just have more strength to handle certain things more than other people. So that's just the way I think about it. But yeah, ultimately, what I want to draw your attention to is that what's going on in our mental and emotional states, however we're dealing with stress and however we're coping with it, or however we're having stress, okay? Whatever's going on in your mental and emotional states, even though it takes place in your mind and it takes place in your emotional state, it does affect your physical body. It will affect your physical body over time. It will. I mean, it does in the present moment. It does affect your body in the present moment, but it will negatively affect your body over time if you continue to stay in that state. Okay? It will. So, and it also affects your overall well-being, of course, your emotional, mental state, and your physical state. And that is what becomes a problem. And that's why stress is like basically the number one killer, because, you know, we're too stressed out. We're just in a day and age where we're so stressed out. And it is the number one killer. And it causes it wreaks havoc on the body. Long-term stress wreaks havoc on the body. It does. It creates all kinds of ailments and sicknesses and diseases, and it destroys happiness and peace and optimism. Of course, it really does. It really absolutely does. It definitely physically we are affected by stress, long-term stress, and even doctors say, doctors who just treat the body, deal with the body on a very basic level, very external level. They deal with the body. They say that stress is one of the main reasons why a lot of people are experiencing the ailments that they do. The bodily health issues that they do, the diseases that manifest in the body are from stress. That's what they said. That's what the doctors say, So anyway, yeah, and I know that I'm saying to you that, stress is not good. It's not good. But, I mean, there is some healthy stress, too. There's healthy stress where, stress on a natural level is pretty good, because you do have some stress where it's like, for example, if you are in a situation where your well-being or your safety can be threatened, you experience stress, right, on a very physiological, mental, emotional level, because you know that if you don't get out of that situation, most likely you're not going to be alive, or you might end up dead. So stress is a very good thing to protect us from things that can threaten our well-being and safety. That's what I think. Okay? I do know that all of these emotions and all of these things that we go through have a natural function. But the problem comes is that when you are really not threatened, and your existence is not threatened, your well-being and safety is not threatened, and you are finding stress in things that ultimately do not matter. Ultimately, it does not matter. If you don't have it, it's not going to really necessarily kill you. It's not. It's just because of how we were programmed and how we're designed to think of certain things. And if we don't get that certain thing, or if that certain thing does not happen, that causes us stress because we feel threatened, or we feel like our well-being is going to be taken away. But sometimes it's really just on an irrational level. It's not like a true level where we need it for our absolute survival. Like if you are in a situation where you're even seeing someone who's in danger and it creates stress within you, that's absolutely not natural, because you don't want that person to be hurt, and also you're wondering if you're going to get hurt as well. Or if you're in a large body of water and the water level is rising, and you feel like, oh God, I'm going to drown, and you're getting very stressed and fearful because of it. That's because it's a part of you that is trying to protect you from that type of thing from happening, right? Because it's really a matter between life and death. So good stress really brings you away from situations that can possibly harm you. Okay, it's for your safety, it's for your well-being. It's a natural instinct to want to keep you. It's a natural instinct to keep you away from harm's way, keep you out of harm's way. So that's natural stress is very good. But if it's something that's prolonged, and it's something that's constant, and it's something that is ultimately about something that really doesn't matter, you know what I'm saying? Like if you're stressing about the fact that you don't have makeup, or you don't have the certain shoes that you want. That kind of stress is not real stress. It's not natural stress, because you don't need makeup, and you're pretty sure you can survive without shoes. or at least those specific shoes. You know what I'm saying? So there's good stress, there's natural stress, and then there's stress that's just totally irrational, and stress that's just totally unhealthy. You know, because you're ultimately thinking that your well-being and your safety is threatened. That's really where the stress comes from. You think that your well-being and safety is threatened. So anyway, and it's, you know what, if you are experiencing, and I don't want to say it like, you know, I'm blaming you or telling you, oh gosh, you gotta, you know, you have to, don't do this, don't do that, and you just gotta get rid of that bad stress or that unhealthy stress or the unnatural stress. Yeah, because I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, you know what, it's not to say that you're a human being and you should not or cannot feel stress at any time or any point in your life. You know, even if it's just about your son, you're stressed about your son, you're stressed about your money, you're stressed about something like that. I mean, you are going to feel stress. You are going to feel stress at some time in your life. And it becomes overwhelming, it becomes challenging, and especially if you're someone who cares so much about things, like you're very conscientious or you're very caring or you're very responsible in certain ways, and something doesn't work out or it doesn't happen to your liking, you can feel stress. You feel stress because you want it to be right, or you want it to be this way, or you want that to be paid on time or whatever, and it doesn't. That can cause a lot of stress for you. So I'm not blaming you. This is something that stress has been really a big problem for me. Stress has been with anxiety and worry. It's in conjunction. I wouldn't say in conjunction. Anxiety and worry do encompass stress, because when you're anxious and worried, that's stress. That is stress. So anxiety and worry, big stressors for me. I mean, big problems for me, okay? Okay, the conflict comes in with stress because, yes, it is something that we are reacting to or responding to. It's the way we're thinking about something, okay? And you sometimes, and of course, you may know this. You may know that, okay, I'm stressing for no reason. Or I don't really need to stress, but yet I'm still stressing. Well, let me tell you why. Well, it's because it's become a habit. It has become a habit. And, of course, I always talk about the ego, and it really is the ego. It really is the ego. When we're speaking about stress that is unnatural, or stress that is, you know, irrational, you know what I'm saying? Just stress that is not based off of our own well-being and safety. It's that type of thing, you know what I'm saying? It's our ego, because, of course, I keep saying about the ego wanting to be in control. Our ego wants to be in control, and our ego wants things to be the way we want it to be. And when we don't get it the way we want it to, that's when we feel stressed. That's when we feel like we need to be in control. And that's what comes from the ego. So these patterns are very deep and powerful, okay? And we get to the point, or we perhaps are not even aware, or we forget. If you do know about this, you forget and you're unaware that we can choose what we think about something. We can choose the way we think about something, and we can choose how we can feel. And I know this. I absolutely know this, because when you grow, when you develop, when you evolve, when you mature, there are certain things, let's say when you were 18 years old or when you were 17 years old, that something that was similar to something you are dealing with now, and you have gone through something, that same thing, okay, on some level when you were 18, and you couldn't handle it, or at least you felt like you couldn't handle it, and you became very angry, you became very fearful, or you became very depressed, and you just felt like, I just cannot do this. This is ridiculous. And then when you grow and you evolve and you learn and you mature, and then you get to this stage where you're dealing with something that's related to that situation when you're 18, but you can handle it a lot better now. It doesn't bother you, it doesn't affect you, or it doesn't nearly affect you. It doesn't affect you nearly as much as it used to, because you've matured and you've changed. Ultimately, when you mature, to mature mentally means is that you've grown, you've developed, you've you understand, you have more knowledge, you have more experience. Your mind has physically developed, and your behaviors and your response and your patterns, everything has changed because of age and because of experience. So now that you're older, it doesn't bother you nearly as much because you realize, okay, well, I don't have to feel angry about that, or I don't need to feel sad about that because I know that it's not nearly as bad as I thought it was when I was younger. I know that I can get through it. I know that it's not a deal breaker. I know that it's not threatening my well-being. So that's why you're not affected nearly as much as you were in the past, or you don't have that response or that reaction because you changed. And it's all in the mind. It was all in the mind. It was all the development, maturity, and the growth is all in your mind. So I know for a fact that with stress, it's about our habits, and it's about our patterns, and it's about how we choose to think and how we feel about it. And the thing is, like, I'm just gonna once again say that even though we are aware that this is true, and we are aware that we could choose how we think and how we feel, it still is very, very difficult because the ego gets in the way. And the ego wants control, and the ego, especially if we're presented with something that we don't know how to deal with, the ego doesn't know what to do, and then it flares up all over again, and we get fearful, and we get anxious, and we get worried, and we don't know how to handle anything. It's this vicious pattern and cycle that takes a very long time to, I would say, dismantle. It takes a while for you to disarm the ego. It really does. It becomes very difficult. So I'm saying all of this stuff because I understand that you feel stress, and I understand that it's hard for you to stop feeling stress, or to at least lessen your stress levels, okay? It's not about blaming, and I know that there are just times where we're going to feel stress because we forget that we can choose how we feel and think. And because these patterns are so ingrained, and they're so powerful, and they're so deep, and we just feel like we have no choice. It's like an impulse to stress. It's an impulse to have anxiety. It's an impulse to worry. It's an impulse to look at things in a negative, pessimistic manner. You know what I'm saying? So it's very difficult. So you're going to experience stress. That's just how it's going to go. Sometimes you're going to experience stress. When you are conscious enough or aware enough, or you're just in that space where you can realize, okay, Simone, okay, that's not your name. Okay, Julie, or Barbara, or Anne, okay, you don't have to feel this stress. You don't have to, think about it this way. You know that it's going to be okay. You know that's going to be fine. So, and then that's how you can kind of dismantle the pattern of stress. But like I said, it's very, very difficult to be like that, or to catch yourself, or to be aware of it, and to break it, and to disarm it. It's very difficult. So ultimately, what I'm saying, once again, is that we are going to experience stress. At some point or the other, we're going to experience stress. Okay? Because it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of persistent dedication to master our thoughts. That's really what it is. It's mastering your thoughts, changing your patterns, balancing your moods as a result of it, rendering the ego powerless, or at least, let's say, disarming the ego's power. Okay? It takes a long time. And to bring yourself and to maintain a state of pure consciousness, which means that you are living more in the spiritual realm. You're still in your body, but I'm saying you're living more in a spiritual realm than you are in the humanistic, ego-centered way of living and thinking. For you to maintain a state of pure consciousness and awareness where you're basically the true you, you're the real you, because the ego is really not the real you. The ego is a false self that's created humanistically. It's a part of us that we have to deal with in this life. Okay? But to maintain that pure consciousness where nothing can affect you negatively and nothing can stress you out, okay, and you're in peace the majority of the time, almost all of the time, that is absolutely possible, and people have achieved that. But like I said, it takes a lot to get to that point, and very, very few attain that state. Very, very few. Like, there's like a handful of people throughout history that have attained that state because it's so difficult. It is so difficult to attain that state. To get your ego completely out of the way, to disarm it, or to at least render it powerless, so that you can be the true you and you can have that come through, and that none of this external circumstances. Okay, the way that I would say it is that for you to get to that place where nothing external affects you at all, that means that you have to completely disarm your ego, completely render it powerless, where you're not seeing it through the filter of your ego as if you're being threatened or you're in danger. I'm not safe. People are against me. I have to fight. I'm in fight and flight mode because of this. You know what I'm saying? That's the ego. That's the tape that the ego plays. So in order for you to not have external experiences affect you at all, you can't that ego cannot be playing in your mind, or you won't be listening to it. You're rendering it completely powerless, and that's very, very difficult to do. Very few people operate without an ego. Everyone has an ego. Everyone has an ego, and the strength and the intensity of how the ego affects your life, or it, let's say, rules you, that varies greatly with different people. But everybody has an ego, but very, 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 very few people attain that state where the ego does not affect them at all. All right. I think I talked my face off for that piece. Now, let's talk about PTSD and how this relates, and delayed onset PTSD, and how it relates to stress and our struggles with stress. And this is what I was so excited when I said, when I made the connection between these things that I'm going to be speaking about in this episode. When I made the connection between PTSD and delayed onset PTSD, which I'm going to speak to you about just now, I was so excited because I said, wow, that makes so much sense. But anyway, so PTSD, what is it? Well, if you do not know what PTSD is, it stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, or it's also it goes by another name, which is PTSS, which is post-traumatic stress syndrome. So it's a disorder or a syndrome, but that's, they're just labels. But yeah, okay, it's a stress, it's a syndrome, it's a disorder, okay, and it develops for people who have gone through extremely distressing, which is traumatic events and circumstances, okay? So, of course, sexual abuse is one, rape is one, okay? But it can be disastrous events like, you've gone through some kind of natural or unnatural disaster, depending on how you want to look at it, where your entire home was wrecked and you lost your family. Or war. A lot of people refer to this as war. I just always hear those two words, war and PTSD. Always PTSD, or the abbreviation of post-traumatic stress disorder. War and PTSD, because those two go together. But it's just any traumatic event, death, or a near-death experience or encounter, or witnessing someone else die, or witnessing someone else, put them, or whether they're in a situation where they've almost died or they've died. Those type of things can create this PTSD. So it's coming from trauma. Absolutely. It's coming from trauma. And like it says in the abbreviation, or the acronym, I think it's acronym, not abbreviation, pardon me. But in the acronym, PTSD, stress is what I want to point out. It's stress. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay? So mentally and emotionally, it affects you. And it creates stress. And of course, the way that you respond, react, and conduct your life as a result of PTSD, okay? So I'm just going to give you a few different points, because I always like to, give you information about what it is and what it entails, and perhaps if you can see and pinpoint certain things. I just like giving information so we can get a better understanding, okay? So symptoms of PTSD, for those who have gone through catastrophic events, distressing, traumatizing events. So the first one is flashbacks. Flashbacks, nightmares, disturbing memories or feelings from the traumatic experience. Yeah, absolutely. Flashbacks and nightmares, disturbing memories and feelings. The funny thing is, I didn't have so much of that. I didn't really have so much of that, which was flashbacks and nightmares. It's only when I healed, that's when I started to have flashbacks. When I had that upheaval, that really massive upheaval, when I was, before I went to therapy, and it's like everything just came up inside of my mind and my soul. That's when I had flashbacks, but it didn't last very long. It did not last very long. I don't remember how long it lasted, but it didn't last very long. But nightmares, flashbacks, disturbing images, memories, yeah, memories and feelings, yeah. Well, I would say more I had like disturbing memories and feelings, but yes, like I said, everybody's different. I'm just speaking about, for this point, I'm just pointing out for myself that I didn't really have much flashbacks, but other people have had flashbacks. Okay, feelings of danger, threat, not feeling safe, on guard for danger. So in another way I could say it, fight or flight mode. You're constantly in fight or flight mode. And that can entail different symptoms that I'm also going to speak to you about. But yes, feelings of danger and threat, that was a major one that I experienced. Major one was just not feeling safe. Just having this sense of dread. Something bad was going to happen, or something terrible was going to happen, or someone was going to do something to me. I was always on edge and on guard for danger. And of course, this can come with strong feelings, and this is what I can relate to with stress, and also those other episodes that I've made, which is strong feelings of anxiety, worry, guilt and shame as well, too. But I don't think guilt and shame really have to do with danger and threat and not feeling safe. But you know what I'm saying. Like, feelings of anxiety and worry, yeah, that's a huge thing. Because you're not feeling safe, and you don't feel like you don't feel like you're in a place where you're okay, and things are okay, and things will be okay. So danger, feelings of danger and threat, not feeling safe. PTSD, I think that is really the ultimate symptom of PTSD, just constantly feeling like you're in danger or threat, and having strong feelings of anxiety and worry. And those ones, huge for me, massive. And I still have trouble with anxiety and worry, still do, because it's so deeply imprinted in my mind, even when I know better, and I know better. Mentally, I know better, but because of that pattern is so strong, I still struggle with it. But anyway, the next one is restlessness, agitation. That also comes from feelings of danger and threat. So just feeling restless, like you can't stay still. Stay, you cannot stay still. Agitation. Becoming agitated. A lot. Easily startled, scared, physically. Okay, that goes hand in hand with feeling danger and threat, because if you're always thinking something is wrong and something's around the corner, something's lurking behind you, you're going to get easily startled and scared. You're going to feel agitated. You're going to be restless, because it affects you physiologically. It affects you on a real physiological level. A real physical level, you that trauma has affected you, so you're not able to rest. You're not able to relax. Your nervous system is affected greatly, and with that comes hypersensitivity as well. And hypersensitivity can entail, just like I was going back to what I was saying about stress sensitization, where you become more affected by stress. You become more affected by stress. You become more sensitive to stress. Hypersensitivity can also entail that. But I would say it's also like even your senses, just like your senses, like the way you smell and touch and taste and what you feel can become increased. Like you smell more, or you feel more, like, you know, your senses are you're overly sensitive physically. Your taste is overly sensitive. That's something I didn't really consider, because you know what, for a very long time I've been very, very sensitive, just in my senses, like the things that that touch my skin and my smell, my sense of smell, very, very heightened. There's things that I could smell, and I thought that other people had that too, but I realized that they don't. I said, wow, I can smell anything. It's weird. It's like I can sense anything. And also taste. My sense of taste is very sensitive too. But I just thought it was just a matter of me just being sensitive, just in general. But I'm thinking it could possibly be. It could possibly be. It's still a symptom of PTSD, because I'm really sensitive. My senses are very, very in tune and very intense. They're very, very intense. My immune system is very sensitive too. Or not my immune system, my stomach and my digestion and everything is very, very sensitive. I don't know. Could be it. Next point is disturbances in sleep, insomnia. Oh yeah, that's a big one. Disturbances in sleep. Because I mean, of course, if you just remember all of the above points that I've made, it's going to be very hard for you to settle down to sleep. It's going to be very hard for you to stay asleep if you are agitated, if you are irritated, if you are feeling like, if you are feeling threat and danger, if you are on guard, if your fight and flight response is constantly on, which is what PTSD does. It keeps your fight and flight mode on, in a physical way. So you're not going to sit down. You're not going to be able to sleep. You're not going to be able to sleep. If your nervous system is going out of whack, or your nervous system is on speed, okay, and your physical responses are hypersensitive, I mean, you're not going to sleep. It's going to be very hard for you to sleep. Plus all that mental stuff going on in your mind, and the mental stress and the flashbacks, disturbing images, and if you have nightmares too, oh yeah, that's not even gonna help this case of you wanting to sleep. Aggression, anger, irritability. Oh yeah, aggression and anger, irritability, persistent negative thoughts and feelings. I didn't know that was a part of that. I really didn't know, and this can go back to the episode that I made about rage. PTSD can have a big, 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 big deal to do with rage, because you're angry, you're aggressive, you're irritable, you have persistent negative thoughts and feelings about yourself, about others, about the world. When you are mentally in a negative space all the time, it's going to be very hard for you to be happy. In fact, it's impossible for you to be happy, because your mental state is what determines how you emotionally feel. So negativity in your thoughts and in the way that you think is going to affect you. It's going to affect you negatively, emotionally. Okay, so aggression, anger, and irritability. Oh yeah, it's a big one. Depression and hopelessness. Yeah. Yeah, depression, which is hopelessness and despair, despondency. And this is going to be, like I said, I don't know if you watched the last video, but I have to speak like maybe you know, perhaps you didn't watch the last video or last audio, but I'm going to be doing another one, or I'm going to be doing most likely a few about depression and everything else that pertains to depression and everything that we experience when we're depressed. So yeah, depression and hopelessness. Yep, because of the things that you've gone through that were so traumatic, it can depress you. It can make you feel hopeless. Isolation from other people. Isolation from other people, yes. Isolation from other people, because I mean, if you're going to be so sensitive and you're feeling so startled and you don't feel like you're safe, you feel like you're in danger, and this is another point too, you may not have a lot of trust for other people because of that trauma. You may not have trust. I think that's another point, where you do not feel like you can trust other people. That's going to isolate you. That's going to make you want to isolate yourself. Also, if you're experiencing these symptoms and you just sometimes, well, going to what I felt and going to what I experienced, I felt weird. I felt awkward. I felt like something was wrong with me, but I did not know that I was experiencing PTSD. Of course I didn't. I was too young. Okay? I didn't know. But what I'm saying is that because you're experiencing all these symptoms and you're like startled and you're nervous and you're irritable and you're angry and you're this and you're that, you feel like you're awkward. You feel like you are weird, or you think like I always thought I was a freak. I thought I was just weird, like something is wrong with me. Something is wrong with me. Of course, because of the incident itself, but because of the responses and the after effects that I experienced, it was like I felt like something was wrong with me. Something's wrong with me. I'm a freak. I'm different. I'm strange. I'm going through all of these symptoms. So I isolated myself from other people. I isolated myself. I did isolate myself. I still have a tendency to do that too, but it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. But isolation from other people, because possibly you're trying to protect yourself. You're trying to keep yourself safe. You may feel like you're a freak. You may feel like, there's something wrong with me, especially when you're experiencing all those symptoms and you don't know what to do about it and you can't relate to anyone about it. It's those type of things. You avoid anything that reminds you of these events, and that could be people. So maybe you're isolating yourself from people who have traumatized you, who have abused you, and that's totally understandable and justifiable, Anybody that can remind you of those events. And it might not even be people who directly have anything to do with, what you've experienced. It's just that they remind you of someone else, or they remind you of that event, or they remind you of that abuse. So you keep yourself away. You isolate yourself. It's not just people that you avoid. It could be places, it could be locations, it could be even physical objects. You don't like to see physical objects because it reminds you of the abuse. It reminds you of something that you've experienced. So it's not unnatural, you know what I mean? It's not unnatural to experience these things. It's very natural. But yeah, this isolation from others, that is a big thing. And I'm going to make a episode about that. Isolation from others. Absolutely. Because I know isolation is something that I think a lot of us do, especially when we're experiencing all of this stuff. I mean, there's a whole lot of this stuff, all these PTSD symptoms and all this anxiety and worry and shame and guilt and stress and trying to cope and trying to deal. Oh, yeah. It's going to make you feel like you're the only one in the world. And when you feel like you're the only one in the world, you isolate yourself. You really do. The next one is trouble concentrating, focusing, fogginess, memory problems. Oh yeah, it's going to affect your brain too. It's going to affect your ability to concentrate on a very physical level. It's going to affect the way you concentrate and the way you rationalize and the way you everything that you do with your mind is going to be affected. Everything. Trauma affects everything, especially your mind. Also, emotional numbness. Emotional numbness is a big one too. And it can be, because I know I said irritability and aggression and anger and things like that, but it can vacillate. It can seesaw between that, you know, so you have like extreme emotions and you feel very angry and irritable and miserable, but then there are times where you feel absolutely nothing and you feel numb. And you feel you don't have any sense of feeling. Or you don't really have you don't have those feelings that you usually do. It leaves you emotionally numb. But I keep thinking that is, yes, it's PTSD, but what I'm saying is I feel like that's your brain, your mind's way of coping with the trauma and with the stress. So you just kind of numb out. You numb out to cope. You numb out. That I just believe that. I just feel like that's your brain saying, okay, well, I can't handle this. This is too much. I'm emotionally numb now. I'm going to numb myself. I think it's a coping mechanism, to be honest. I really think so. Okay, so those are the symptoms of PTSD or PTSS. Okay, and this is from studies. And, you know, because I didn't know a whole bunch of stuff about PTSD, you know, throughout the years. I never really researched. I never really seen it. I never really paid attention to it. Even when I was going to therapy and even when I was learning about trauma and I was learning about this and I was learning about that, I never sat there and really decided to really look into PTSD too much. I don't really know why. But anyway, the point is recently I have, and it's really clicking things into place. Really clicking things into place. But PTSD usually occurs, and this is from studies, okay, within a month of the traumatic event or events. And the symptoms can persist for years to come. But of course, like, you know, like I keep saying, we're all individual, we're all different. We all have a different threshold for stress and for it, you know, problems and how we react to it, how we respond to it, how our physical minds are built, what we're genetically predisposed to experiencing. So it depends. But they say on average within a month, that's when most people experience these symptoms, and it can persist for a while. And of course it depends on how long it persists, because it depends how fast you heal and what you do to heal and what you do to recover and how you cope and how your lifestyle is. It's a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, very, very broad, okay? But what I've discovered recently, I did not know this even existed. I knew PTSD existed. I didn't know a whole lot about it. But what I've recently discovered is that there's something called delayed-onset PTSD, or delayed expression, or primordial expression, something like that. And what this means is for some individuals, this is for some people, not all people, but some people. Some people are different, okay? And I mean, all people are different, but there are just a group of people, some people who have gone through these traumatic events. They actually do not immediately experience these PTSD symptoms. What I mean is, like, within a month, they do not experience any PTSD symptoms, or sometimes it's very, very, very subtle and it's very few, and you can't really make the difference with that. You cannot tell the difference between what you were before that event and how you are after the event. So it's very, very subtle, or you do not experience it at all. And then what qualifies it as delayed PTSD is the fact that 6 months after that event has ended, or that circumstance or events have ended, this is that's when you experience the PTSD symptoms. and many times years after you continue to experience it. So that what that means is that you've gone through something traumatic, but you don't have any symptoms until after. But this is just on average of what they're saying. They're saying 6 months after, which is the qualification. But what it can be is that it can be even later than 6 months. It could be a year later, or it can be years later. Okay? That's when they experience it, or that's when you experience it. And like I said, it's not to say that you do not experience any PTSD symptoms. Although you can, there's a chance that you don't experience any. But most of the time you do experience some. But it's very subtle, and it's very little, it has very little impact. But then within a year's time, or 6 months' time, or years ahead, you then experience severe PTSD symptoms. Okay, so let me clarify what I mean. I'm saying that sometimes it happens in a crescendo. Not sometimes. With the delayed onset PTSD, it's a crescendo. So that means you get very, very few, very, very little PTSD within a month, and then possibly 6 months, or more than 6 months, you get these really severe PTSD. So it happens in a crescendo. It's very, very small, very, very little, and then it just grows, and it gets severe, and it gets worse as time goes on. And that's how I wanted to explain about that, because PTSD, like I was saying, usually occurs within a month, and people get these really severe symptoms, and they get these really, really bad reactions to it. But there are some of us who do not experience much of it right away, or within a month, but then after that, it blows up and it gets worse. And when I read this, I said, oh my gosh, this explains so much. And then I don't think this is something that this is a coined, actual symptom or syndrome. Not a syndrome or symptom or disorder or whatever, but I'm saying this is something that they just recently discovered that can happen later on in life, because we already know PTSD is a real term, okay? But this delayed onset PTSD, it was just recently something that they brought out there to say, okay? And because I never heard about this delayed onset PTSD, I never knew it existed, but it makes so much sense. It resonates with me completely. It explains so much about the things that I've gone through and the struggles that I've continued to have for so long, And also, what I want to point out is that the individuals, or you, who have experienced PTSD to a level where you didn't really notice, or it was kind of subtle. But then what happens is that later on in life, this is aside from the whole crescendo theory, okay? Not theory, but the whole crescendo understanding of this delayed onset, okay? Aside from that, there are times where you possibly did not experience PTSD symptoms, or very, very little, very, very few. But what happens is that you have none, or you have very little, until something happens, like you have a situation or event or a major change in your life, and then this stirs up, those subconscious cues about trauma, which is ultimately triggering. You've become triggered, and then you just have this upheaval of symptoms, this upheaval of severe PTSD symptoms, and then you can struggle with it for years to come, or it can go away and then come back again when you have, you've going through something else. But ultimately what I'm saying is that sometimes these PTSD symptoms do not show up until later on in life, or when you're experiencing a situation that somehow subconsciously triggers some kind of thing within you that relates to what it is you were going through back then, and then you experience the brunt of all of these symptoms that you really should have experienced back then. I wouldn't say should have, but you know what I mean? It would have made more sense for you to experience it back then, but you going through something. And most likely it can be quite benign. It doesn't even really have to be anything closely it doesn't have to be anything as close as traumatic as what it is that you originally went through, but it's somehow your subconscious got those cues of, or made the relationship or made the connection to that trauma that you experienced, and then it just brought up this whole thing. It brought up all these symptoms, but it really is just a result of what happened back then, but you're now experiencing all those symptoms that you wouldn't otherwise experience if you had not gone through that. So anyway, so that's what can happen. I said all of this to say, okay, all of this discussion about this delayed onset was to say that perhaps the stress you're experiencing, whether it's the anxiety and worry, panic attacks, mood swings, irritability, anger, insomnia, you think, the stress that you are experiencing, you think that is really deriving from your current circumstance or situation or problem, perhaps really is just a triggered reaction. It's just a triggered reaction, which is your thoughts and your feelings and physiological responses from a previous time that your subconscious made a connection to. That's ultimately what I'm saying. So maybe the stress you are experiencing right now and the severity of the stress you're experiencing now, the intensity of the stress you're experiencing now, the fact that you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my mind, I'm losing my mind. Or, this is really bad, I'm so stressed, I'm so stressed. It could possibly be from you're experiencing symptoms from a previous time that were triggered. And maybe even you experienced PTSD back then and it was severe. But then you healed and you dealt and you recovered and you used different coping mechanisms and things like that, or coping strategies, and then that tapered off and it went down, and then you said, okay, well, I'm healed, and then something comes up and then it's like, this flare up. But it's really that you got triggered. Something triggered within you, and then you're just, it just comes all out. So I'm thinking that could definitely be it. I just feel the resonation with that, understanding that sometimes, because even if I could explain with myself, like, when there are times where I'm stressed and it's something, it doesn't even have to be something really big. It could be something very small, and I'm stressed, and then you have other people. I would have other people around me who would look at what it is that I'm experiencing or what I'm stressed about and say, Simone, that's really not a big deal. Why are you so stressed? It's not that big of a deal. And they just cannot understand why I'm so stressed about it. Because really, of course, within their own mind, it's not a big deal. But really, in actuality, it really isn't that big of a deal. But because I'm experiencing triggering of some kind of PTSD, I think it's so horrible and it's so awful and there's so much I have to deal with and I'm so worried and so anxious and I'm so sick about it. And it's really just because it's something that is coming from another time. It's like I'm experiencing that upheaval of PTSD and somehow it's being transferred into what it is my current situation is. So I'm really just making so much more out of it because I'm having these symptoms and I'm experiencing these symptoms. And like I said about PTSD, it's a stress disorder. So what does that mean? That means that you are stressed. You are overly stressed because it's the disorder. The disorder or the syndrome is going to make you overly stressed. It's an overreaction. It's an overreaction, a physiological reaction, a psychic or a psychological reaction, or an emotional reaction. It's just an overreaction of something. So the issue or the issue or the event may not even warrant that type of behavior or warrant that type of reaction, but because of this PTSD, which is a stress disorder, you overreact and you overly feel stressed. So it's triggered by stress, it's about stress, and it creates more stress. That's what it is. So I had to talk about PTSD. Sometimes for you, extreme stress and your inability to handle it can be an indication that you're still dealing with some PTSD on some level. That's what I think. Anxiety and worry, stress and frustration and anger and irritability, these type of things. Your ability to think the worst of things, or your tendency to think the worst of things and to think that things are going to turn to hell and things are going to fall apart, things are not going to be okay. I'm telling you, it's a very real thing, but because it's it affects us internally in our mental state and our emotional state, we don't even realize that that's what it is. We just think that that's how we are. Nah. Most likely it's PTSD. And there are other symptoms. If you're experiencing other symptoms of whatever kind, you can that can particularly cause problems for you. Maybe you can take it into consideration that it's pertaining to this that I'm speaking about. I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is you're dealing with, but yeah. So it can be a vicious cycle. It can be a vicious cycle, just like I was explaining about the stress and how it is stress. It's a stress disorder, and it's triggered by stress, and it creates more stress. It can be a vicious cycle. And if we continue with this turbulent cycle of stress, it can affect our bodies, and it can affect us on a real physical level, and that can cause some problems. Adrenaline fatigue, specifically, that can occur as a result of continuous stress, and this happens on a very physical level, a very physical and internal level. So in part 2, I will speak about adrenaline fatigue and its relation to stress and its relation to everything that I'm speaking about, its effects, and how we can manage and lighten our stress loads in our minds and bodies. So, yep, that's it. Yeah, that's it for today. Hopefully that helped you on some level. But yeah, thank you for listening to A Woman's Guide to Reclaiming Wholeness After Sexual Abuse. And if you like what you heard, please rate and review on iTunes. So next week we will explore just the same episode, which is dealing with stress, delayed onset PTSD, and adrenaline fatigue. And this is part 2, where I'm going to be focusing more on adrenaline fatigue and the ways to cope with stress. So be sure to tune in, and until next time, take care.